The phone slips from trembling hands. Rain begins to fall, softly at first, then all at once, as if the sky, too, has something to release. Somewhere in the world, someone receives news they didn't expect, an ending, a loss, a turn they never saw coming. And for a long moment, they just sit, silent, staring, searching for breath in the middle of a storm they didn't summon. You've likely had one of those days, we all have, when it feels like the ground beneath you shifts, and the questions rise louder than any answer. Why now? What did I do to deserve this? Is this karma? Or just chaos? Welcome to Stoic Dhamma, a space where ancient wisdom meets modern life, slowly and thoughtfully. Here, we do not chase answers in haste. We sit with questions, we let the echoes speak. And today, we ask a question older than philosophy itself. Can you stay still, calm, present when everything around you begins to collapse? With composure, with courage. It's about stepping into the storm, not with resistance, but with the kind of strength that doesn't shout, doesn't fight, but simply remains. This video is not about eliminating suffering. It's about something far more powerful. It's about learning to walk through suffering with clarity. We'll explore the wisdom of the Stoic Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and the deep insight of Eastern thought, the karma of action and reaction, the detachment of yoga, the stillness of Buddhist equanimity. Not as distant ideas, but as practical guidance for a world that moves too fast and wounds too often. So take a breath. Let this be your moment of pause. We begin not with noise, but with silence. Not with control, but with attention. Let's begin. In a quiet kitchen, someone stands alone, holding a letter they never expected. Its contents carry weight, perhaps a diagnosis, a termination, or the quiet ending of a relationship. Nothing around them moves. The walls remain still, the light unchanged. But something inside shifts. Over time, these reactions carve the patterns that shape life. In another part of the world, the Stoics, though never using the word, describe this same chain. And yet, in that instant, there exists a fork. To continue down the path of frustration or to pause. To return to the body. To remember the limits of control. The outside situation remains unchanged, but within, something settles. The moment after bad news, when one breathes and places a hand on the heart, not to change anything, but to feel fully. That pause is not weakness, it is strength. Both Stoicism and Eastern philosophy return here again and again. Not to avoidance, but to clarity. Suffering is inevitable, but so too can stillness, patience, clarity. Each night, the Stoics reflected not with shame, but with care. They tended the soul as a craftsman tends a tool. Seneca wrote of contentment, not as stagnation, but as dignity, a person standing calmly with what is given, not scrambling for what is withheld. Not out of passivity, but out of poise. This is not the apathy of the disengaged, but the sovereignty of the self-mastered. Not perfecting it all at once, but sharpening gently, again and again. But how we meet it, that is choice. As thoughts become actions, and actions form patterns, a person becomes their posture toward life. Not in grand gestures, but in the tiniest responses. The way one exhales, the way one waits before speaking, the way one lets a harsh word dissolve before it multiplies. That shift, imperceptible to others, is the beginning of liberation. The outer traffic continues, the inner storm dissolves. But the second arrows are optional, the stories that follow, that this should not be, that life is unfair, that we are broken. Returning, again and again, to the only thing you ever truly control, how you meet the moment. They are the posture they hold in the midst of it, not the wave, but the stance, not the chaos, but the clarity. When grace replaces resistance, karma shifts, samsara slows. Even if life continues in its motion, the mind no longer does. The teachings remind us that much of suffering is compounded. But within those moments, there is space. A pause, a choice. That space is where transformation begins, and when practiced enough, that choice becomes your nature. Pain is real, but the suffering we create around it can be softened, even stopped. You can become the still point in its current. You can choose not to be reborn into every wave of reaction. Instead, you remain a presence within movement, a silence within sound. They studied the space between stimulus and response. For them, freedom wasn't about controlling the world, it was about mastering one's own posture within it. In the Bhagavad Gita, this is spoken as the essence of right living. A colleague refuses gossip. A person walks away from a familiar resentment. These actions are not dramatic, but they bend the arc of karma. They rewrite the self, breath by breath. Duty, carried without demand. Work, done without attachment. The Stoics said the same. They called it living according to nature, not nature as forest and sky, but as the nature of things. To live aligned with truth, with proportion, with virtue. To accept the season without trying to speed the harvest. The world moved. Fortune rose and fell, but the mind could remain steady. Without thinking, they walk outside, into open air, into a space just wide enough to carry what cannot be named. That moment, quiet, simple, almost invisible, is where the story begins. In the rhythm of modern life, struggles rarely arrive like thunder. They show up between appointments, folded inside daily routines. They sit silently between emails and errands. Often, these moments don't look like tragedies from the outside. But inside, they echo. They bend the breath. Western culture teaches mastery over results, more planning, more control, more certainty. But inner freedom is something else. It doesn't come from taming events. It arises from meeting events without being undone by them. It doesn't ask the storm to pass. It asks whether the soul can remain upright while it rains. In those moments, people reach for meaning. Sometimes they call it karma, perhaps out of guilt, or confusion, or longing to understand. Not as a spiritual principle, but as a form of judgment. Yet karma, when stripped of superstition, does not punish, it flows. It is continuity, not condemnation. A chain of causes and effects that includes thought, action, and intention. In the teachings of the East, karma is architecture. Each thought shapes a habit, each habit reinforces a reaction. In a world obsessed with control, this wisdom remains quietly radical. A person sits in traffic, running late, caught between schedules. Heat builds in the chest, thoughts surge, blame forms. Ancient texts remind us we are not owed outcomes, we are entrusted only with action. These teachings do not require robes or rituals. They begin in kitchens and crosswalks, in offices and bedrooms. A parent calms their voice instead of yelling, and when difficulty comes, as it must, awareness becomes the anchor. Not denial, but presence. Pain may come as illness, loss, rejection. These are the first arrows. In the mind, attention is the gardener. Whatever is nourished grows. Fear, resentment, self-pity, if watered, they bloom. This is karma in practice. It is not a cosmic scoreboard. It is the invisible momentum of one's choices. A wise life is not immune to change. It is open to it. The teachings from both West and East return to one clear idea, that a person is not what happens to them. The world will always offer tests. Some loud, some silent. You cannot stop the river, but you can learn to move with it, without drowning. And perhaps that is the essence of freedom, not found in escape, but in return. In the shadow of Athens' crumbling marble, or beneath the dense canopy of ancient India's forests, a rare kind of silence echoed, one, not born from absence, but from immense presence. There have always been a few who, even as the world collapsed around them, did not collapse within. When sentenced to death by a jury of his peers, he did not protest, nor did he flee. He drank the poison hemlock offered to him, surrounded by friends in mourning. But Socrates, serene and present, reminded them gently that death was nothing to fear, so long as one had lived in truth. As he neared his end, forced to take his own life by the very emperor he once mentored, he remained composed. In his writings, He warned, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." To these men, and the mystics of the East, suffering was not to be feared, it was to be examined, understood, even embraced. The unexamined life, he had once said, is not worth living. In 1961, in the southern Indian region of Andhra Pradesh, archaeologists made a curious discovery at the Buddhist site of Nagarjunakonda, not because they are immune, but because they have practiced the art of returning to center. As the Gita tells us, the one who is steady in pain and pleasure, who regards a clod of earth, a stone, and a piece of gold as the same, that one is dear to me, Epictetus walking free in chains, and Marcus riding by candlelight. Their lives are not relics, they are road maps, to choose your response, again and again and again. Inside the ruins of a monastic library, preserved among palm leaf manuscripts, lay fragments of texts that reference Stoic ideals written in Greek. The sage is not passive, but peaceful. They both knew that how we meet the world is the only thing that shapes our world, as the Roman Empire trembled with war and plague. Marcus reminded himself again and again to be like the rock that the waves crash against, but does not move. The impediment to action, he wrote, advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. His Stoicism wasn't detachment from life, it was engagement with life, deeply rooted in wisdom and purpose. One described the concept of apatheia, freedom from passion, not through suppression, but through understanding. Alongside it, the Buddhist idea of upeka was referenced, the equanimity born from deep insight. That these words might have touched the same hands tells us something remarkable, that across continents and cultures, the human heart has always longed for peace that cannot be shaken. But in that final hour, it became clear, the examined life leads to a death untroubled. You cannot control the tides of life, but you can become the kind of person who does not drown in them. Their lives became quiet testaments to something deeper than understanding, equanimity. Patanjali, the compiler of the Yoga Sutras, wrote that yoga is the calming of the fluctuations of the mind, and yet, they returned again and again to the practice of inner reflection. In Eastern traditions, this practice was formalized in rituals, breath, mantra, silence. In the Stoic world, it lived in writing, in logic, in premeditatio malorum, the mental rehearsal of adversity. Both roads led to the same summit, stillness. And in the West, Stoicism developed its own version, the dichotomy of control. Epictetus, once a slave, would later become a revered teacher of inner freedom. He taught that external events are beyond our power, but how we interpret them, how we respond, is always up to us. Men are disturbed not by things, he said, but by the views which they take of them. Not just the body postures we know today, but a discipline of mental stillness, one that trains the practitioner to act without clinging to results. Let action be yours, he taught, but not its fruits. The wisdom mirrored the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna, standing with the warrior Arjuna on a battlefield, gently counsels him to fight not out of anger or ambition, but because it is his duty. You have control over your actions, Krishna says, but not over the outcome. Socrates, perhaps the most enduring figure in Western philosophy, is remembered not only for his questions, but for his remarkable calm. In parallel, across the vast terrain of India, sages and seers were teaching the same stillness, born not of resignation, but of alignment with cosmic order. This teaching would become the spine of karma yoga, the path of action without attachment. Seneca, advisor to emperors, echoed this in the midst of political intrigue and eventual betrayal. And yet, this deep resonance between traditions was not only theoretical. Think of this, in two entirely different worlds, one grounded in logic and civic virtue, the other in reincarnation and dharma. Wise people arrived at the same insight. Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the most famous Stoic emperor, wrote nightly to himself in what we now call meditations. You might wonder how these men cultivated such clarity. They lived not in tranquility, but amid political turmoil, personal suffering, and the weight of expectation. Imagine being in their presence. The world rages, but they do not. This is not numbness. It is not apathy. It is serenity born of insight. The Stoic is not indifferent, but intentional. So, when life gives you something unexpected, a phone call, a diagnosis, a betrayal, remember Socrates drinking calmly, Patanjali meditating in silence. You don't need to be a philosopher to live like one. You only need to pause, to look inward. That is the path. That is the practice. That is your freedom. In every culture, there are quiet corners, moments wrapped in ritual, designed not to impress the world, but to center the soul. These are not loud practices. They do not seek to control or perform. Instead, they are designed to help the mind grow still, to endure without panic, and to return home again and again to inner peace. In Japan, the way of tea, or Chado, reflects this perfectly. Guests stoop to enter the small tea room, a symbol of humility. What did I do well today? Where did I fall short? What can I learn? This was not self-criticism, but gentle guidance. The same kind of self-examination appears in Hindu and Buddhist traditions. Reflection not as punishment, but as cultivation. When done regularly, these small acts become internal temples, quiet places to return when storms rise. A parent kneels beside a crying child, holding them without rushing. A student, overwhelmed, closes their eyes and takes 3 slow breaths before writing. They create small islands of presence in the ocean of speed. They are ways to remember that peace is not found in perfect conditions, but in our way of being. A worker, before speaking in a tense meeting, places a hand over their chest to feel their heartbeat. It is the moment where you stop and ask, "Is this mine to carry?" And if it is, you lift it with grace, and if it's not, you release it. These are the new ceremonies. They are not ancient, but they are sacred. We need only a moment and the intention to return to center. And in doing so, we become part of something timeless. We become still, not because the world is quiet, but because we are. It is not a metaphor, but a lived experience. Inside a windowless chamber, archaeologists found only a single phrase carved into the wall. When there is nothing more to say, sit here until the mind is quiet, no altar, no statues. Just silence, and the instructions to enter it. The room had no decorations, no inscriptions of power, just space. Its purpose is still debated, but its message feels eternal. It echoes the very heart of Stoic thought. To know peace, one must practice it not through escape, but through stillness in the midst of reality. Sitting still, even in snow and wind, they absorb pain and transform it on the inhale, sorrow, on the exhale, mercy. In a world that constantly pulls us outward, they teach us to return to ourselves. Not to indulge ego, but to ground awareness. Not to reject the world, but to meet it with greater strength. The practice aligns with Stoic thought in its courage and steadiness. Epictetus taught, difficulties show a person's character. So, when trouble comes, think of it as training. We put our phones away for a single silent meal. We journal not for likes, but for clarity. We learn, slowly, to pause before reacting. These are the practices of modern Stoics. They are not grand, but they are real. Both philosophies meet in the recognition that struggle is part of the path, and peace is the fruit of discipline. Inside, the host performs every gesture, folding the cloth, whisking the matcha with exquisite care. The silence is not empty, but full of intention. Time slows, and there is no urgency, no chaos. In such a space, even the pouring of hot water feels sacred. The Stoics did not have tea ceremonies, but they understood the same truth, that calm must be trained, not hoped for. Seneca wrote, "You must lay aside the burdens of the mind. Until you do that, no place will satisfy you." In the quiet of the tea room, this becomes true. Elsewhere, in the Himalayas, Tibetan monks rise before dawn to chant and practice Tonglen, the act of breathing in suffering and breathing out compassion. In ancient Persia, elite warriors engaged in a lesser-known ritual before battle. For 12 hours, they would sit in darkness, fasting and meditating. No weapons, no speeches, just stillness, breath, and thought. When dawn came, they emerged not as conquerors, but as men emptied of fear. Some historians believe this tradition was influenced by Zoroastrian ideas of balance between light and dark. Others see it as a training of the soul. But one thing is clear, the ritual was not about strategy, it was about readiness. The Stoics, too, prepared for life's battles through contemplation. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that hardship was part of life's design. The impediment to action, he wrote, advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The patterns continue through time. In ancient Greece and Rome, philosophers like Seneca and Marcus would end their day by journaling, not to boast or confess, but to refine. A fascinating mystery was discovered in Egypt, in the remains of a small temple near Edfu. These ancient forms of ritual, the tea ceremony, the silent fast, the breath prayer, the evening journal, have one thing in common: they draw attention inward. Today, such rituals may seem distant or impractical, but they are not lost. In fact, they continue in the most ordinary ways. Even in digital spaces, some of us now set intentions before opening the news. Seneca said, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence on the future." That is what these rituals help us do. Stillness is not an action, it is choice. It is space between stimulus and response. So perhaps we do not need a monastery or a mountain. In the present day, karma often emerges in conversation as a half-joke or a spiritual threat. That's karma, someone says when another faces misfortune. These are the small waves that ripple through every modern day. You could react with anger, resentment, sarcasm. That is one path. Or you could pause. In that pause, you create karma. Not the kind that waits to punish you in the future, but the kind that shapes who you become now. Both karma and Stoicism are clear on this. No one escapes the consequences of action, but guilt is not the teacher, reflection is. Seneca said, "Every day we must examine ourselves, not to punish, but to learn." Karma does not trap you in endless payment, it teaches you to become conscious. And the moment you see, clearly and without denial, is the moment you begin to change the current. It means you can plant seeds without grasping for harvest. She had done everything right, but politics and rumor took their toll. But karma, like Stoic discipline, invites slowness. Not to dominate others, but to become free from their control. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That strength is not loud. It is not armor. It is a softness, deeply rooted. A calm choice in the middle of storm, reflection, intention. It invites us to become gardeners of our own minds. It is shaped, moment by moment, by your attention and intention. That choice, repeated gently, becomes your life. As the Bhagavad Gita teaches, be steadfast in yoga, O Arjuna. Perform your duty and abandon all attachment to success or failure. Marcus Aurelius echoes this across time. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. Stoicism, too, is not the denial of feeling. It is the art of responding wisely to it. When the future is uncertain, return to the present. When karma visits in the form of challenge, greet it with dignity. You are not here to escape the storm. You are here to remember, you are the sky. Together, they show us that suffering is not the end of peace. Sometimes, it is the beginning of wisdom. When you speak honestly even when afraid, you change the pattern of choosing wisely again and again, not because it's easy, but because it's who you are. Karma is not waiting to find you. In those moments, the question is not why the storm came, but who we become inside it. This is where the philosophies of karma and Stoicism join hands, not to explain suffering away, but to give us footing when the ground moves beneath us. It is already flowing from you. When you let go of bitterness and return to presence, you change the pattern. This is the real work of karma. It does not live in the stars. It lives in the space between breath and word, between urge and restraint, between thought and action. To ask, what seeds am I planting with this thought, this word, this silence? At first, she was furious, resentful of the company, of her boss, even of herself, but she paused. Each day, she journaled her reactions, asking the Stoic questions: is this within my control? What is the wise thing to do? Over time, her focus shifted. She could not change the past, but she could shape the future. She used the moment to learn, to heal, and to start a more meaningful path. This is karma in motion, not as fate, but as transformation. You can speak your truth without needing applause. You can forgive without needing thanks. In this way, karma and Stoicism both create space. Space from craving, space from fear, space from the stories we tell ourselves about winning and losing. The Stoics call this the dichotomy of control, the boundary between what happens and how you respond. Years later, the teacher remembers that moment, not with pride, but with humility. In that awareness, a new karma is born. The teacher now speaks with more care, listens more, pauses more. The old action cannot be erased, but it has become a lesson. This is karma as evolution, not punishment. Epictetus wrote, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Karma, too, begins in the reaction. An action done without malice, even if mistaken, carries a different weight than one done to harm. The Bhagavad Gita teaches, you have a right to your action, but not to its fruits. This echoes the Stoic focus on inner ethics rather than outer control. What you do is yours, what happens afterward is not. But such remarks miss the deeper truth. Karma, like Stoicism, is not about punishment. It's not the universe getting even. It is a pattern of action, intention, and result, a mirror reflecting our choices. Together, they ask not what is fair, but what is wise. They do not fixate on outcome, but on effort. They care less about being right, and more about being aligned with truth, with virtue, with peace. To live with this awareness is not to fear every misstep, but to become intentional with every movement of the mind. In this way, karma becomes more than a cosmic ledger. It becomes a call to presence. Imagine yourself at a crossroads. A driver cuts you off, a friend disappoints you, or a stranger speaks sharply. There is a quiet nobility in choosing restraint, in not replying to a cruel message, in smiling when you could blame, in forgiving when no one says sorry. These actions don't always feel victorious, but they are powerful. They break cycles. Marcus Aurelius advised himself, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. Here, karma is not a system of justice, but of becoming. Who you are, in every small decision, creates your path forward. In this sense, karma is not a distant law, it is a moment-by-moment awareness. And Stoicism, far from being cold or emotionless, becomes a compassionate guide. You might ask, what happens when I've done wrong? Consider the example of a teacher who once acted out of ego, perhaps shamed a student, or spoke in anger. In Hindu and Buddhist thought, karma is deeply tied to intention. This idea may feel uncomfortable in a world focused on results. But in truth, it is freeing. There is a modern story of a woman who lost her job unjustly. We live in a time of great speed. Notifications pull our attention. Opinions demand reaction. Every mistake feels public. There is a stillness in this, a quiet power, not to control the future, but to meet it well. When you respond with grace to someone who expects anger, you change the pattern. And so, we return to the Stoic path, not a path of suppression, but of sovereignty. Sometimes, life arrives like a storm, fast, unfair, unrelenting. A diagnosis, a betrayal, a goodbye we weren't ready for. What you've learned is not just theory. It is practice. Karma is not fate carved in stone. You are not what happens to you. You are how you choose to carry it. So when the wind howls, return to the breath. Thank you for walking this journey with us. See you in the next meditation.